Hi, I'm Ed Koehler with Extreme Networks, and I'm a distinguished principal engineer within our Chief Technology Office. I focus on security. It's pretty much what I do. Today, I'd like to talk with you about network security best practices for Zero Trust and how you can use these practices within your organization to bring a more consistent security profile. So without further ado, let's move forward. First off, we have to realize that no company is 100% secure, no matter what your practice. And there is no one size fits all. The security profiles for a state and local government will be drastically different than that for a university or a K through 12 school. Use your industry as a guide. Think about data fidelity. What, when, and where. Who should see the data, always on a least privilege basis. Make sure you're aware of the expectations that are set upon you, not only from your users, but also from your staff and potentially from your customer base as well, and also from the governments. Remember, there are expectations from governments, and that touches on regulatory requirements. And then finally, recognize your existing infrastructure. And many people really don't have a good handle on what is in place in their networks, and we're going to talk about that. And then finally, review this with your business. Look at your strategic vision as an organization, because we really do believe at Extreme that good security strategy is really one that's multi-level and one that can't be divorced from the business practice. So with that statement and that introduction, let's move forward on this. We have to realize that Zero Trust is not a technology. You can't go and buy a product from some company that's telling you this will give you a Zero Trust environment. Zero Trust is a practice. Technologies are involved, of course, there's no doubt about that. But it's up to the human beings, it's up to the security operations staff to make sure that these technologies are implemented consistently and in the right fashion to provide Zero Trust. Network security as a result is a journey, and I'm going to talk about it in 4 basic facets. First of all, getting the basics right. And even very advanced security folks sometimes miss these, and I just want to take a quick review of those. Then we want to talk about enforcing proper security practices and consistency in the implementation of those practices. I want to talk about leveraging industry resources as well, because there are quite a few out there that are available to you. Many of them are free, and I want to make sure that you have awareness of them because they do provide a very good set of tools and social environments where you can actually talk to people and get advice from the best. And then finally, continued vigilance. We have to realize that Zero Trust means that you never trust any system or any user explicitly, which means you have to have continued vigilance, you have to have continued visibility, and you have to be prepared to react when you see anomalies and things that are not right. So let's take this journey and let's go step by step. The first thing I want to talk about is getting the basics right. And this is really like if you're going to build a house, you want to build a solid foundation, and this sets the foundation. And these are the basics. Basically, access controls, firewalls, antivirus protection for your end systems, network access control and policy. And we'll spend quite a bit of time on that because Extreme does focus in this area quite extensively. Password controls. And an interesting part about it is that many times, and there's actually a study on this from MIT, that it's actually the password length that is the key. So 8 digits in a password is simply not enough. You should be pushing your users towards passphrases. They don't even have to be complex symbolic. It can just be the brown fox jumped over the fence. Put that all together, change the O to a 0, and you've got a very good uncrackable password that would take quite a bit of computational power. And then, of course, the refresh period. Make sure that people don't hang with passwords forever. So password controls are a lot easier than we think, particularly when we match them with our human mentality and our human memory, because we can remember phrases a lot easier than we can complex sets of symbols and letters and numbers. Patch management. This is something that many people fall down on. And one of the reasons why is because it's complex and it's very difficult. And I'm going to give some advice to assist you in making sure that you do have proper patch management practice, because it can help to stop up to 70% of the potential attacks that we have out there. Security training is another big thing. We have to make sure that the number of people that fall victims to attacks can be reduced by just making them a little wiser. And actually, if you do it right, they can actually help in further detection and remediation by reporting phishing events and things of that nature in your organization. Finally, offline backups. When ransomware hits, this is the number one security measure above all others, and you may be thankful for having it, but there are a few things you need to be sure of when you start doing offline backups. And then finally, again, get your regulatory compliance into place. So let's move on to step 2, and this is a little bit more comprehensive. We're going to go a little deeper, and this is going to talk about enforcing proper security practices. Now, what I've done here is I've tried to encapsulate 10 of the best practices that you need to enforce, and I'm going to talk quite a bit about some of these, and then other ones are kind of self-explanatory, such as compliance. But I want to talk about this in basically the scope, again, of a practice, because we have to realize that at the end of the day, these different practices that are implemented actually are quite cyclic, and actually there's epicycles within this as well. A great example of this is a risk assessment, being sure you know what's in your network, having the ability for network visibility, which allows you to get your risk assessment and your network asset inventory. You have to basically have policy-based control access and network segmentation to complement that. Again, network visibility gives you the capability to make sure that that's monitored and controlled. And then finally, IoT security, another aspect that marries to the practices that I talked about above. So as you can see, all of these practices are somewhat interrelated and result into what I call the Zen of proper security practice. So let's talk about some of these specifics, because I think some of them are very important to understand. The first and biggest one is the asset inventory and a corresponding risk assessment. Now, security risks are different for every industry, as I said earlier, but all of them have basically a critical aspect of the changing role in the network. The network is becoming a very critical asset to most, if not all, organizations. In combination to this, the network perimeter is continuing to expand. Services, infrastructure are migrating to the cloud. That's further creating a blurring of the demarcation. IoT and ransomware are colliding. We have to be sure that we get a handle on that, because once IoT becomes compromised, it becomes a perfect way to port ransomware in. And at that point, I don't have to have a human click on a phishing email or a water hole type of web interface. If I can compromise an IoT device and it is connected up to the user domain of interest, then I can actually start to infect end user end systems and possibly get to the crown jewels. And this is all touching on to the aspect of segmentation, and we'll talk about that later. Now, once we get to getting an asset inventory, make sure that you consider your IT systems, obviously, but also consider your OT, your industrial control systems. If you're manufacturing, your IoT environments, such as video surveillance, building control, things of that nature. HVAC, prioritize. Now, this is a key thing. One of the things that I tell people is that when you're going to do an asset inventory and a risk assessment, don't start it with your security people, really, because you're probably going to train wreck. Have it happen with your business. They'll give you an idea of what critical systems need to be up and running. They will also tell you the ones that need to be protected from vulnerabilities. From then, you can prioritize not only your asset inventory, but also your risk assessments, and then how you go about establishing your patching practice to make sure that these systems are basically up to date and have the best security profile that you can basically muster. And the only way you can do that is by establishing proper practicing and practices for patching. Now, the key here is that if you try to do this for every system in your enterprise, you're likely going to stumble. If you have a prioritized set of systems that your business directives have given you, then now you have something that's tractable. Now you have the ability to prioritize systems, and you can leave less vulnerable, more isolated systems kind of on the back burner. Obviously patch them, but they're not as critical as the ones that are highlighted in top tier from your business executive's perspective. So this is overall advice that I have for you. Keep in mind the variety of devices. Understand what's in your network, why it's in your network, who owns it, and have some sort of established policy. This touches on segmentation, IT and IoT isolation, strong access controls, audit trails, and tiered environments. Remember, this can slow or prevent propagation of malware in your environment. And in the event of a breach, segmentation is the difference between a minor incident and a catastrophe. And this was said by a very good friend of mine, and I use the quote constantly because it's true. Simple segmentation can save you from a lot of the things that you might find vetting within the IoT environment or industrial control environment. The only way you can really protect yourself is by proper microsegmentation within your own environment. This touches into IoT as well. And there are really 3 tiers to IoT security. Many people find this daunting and a security challenge because of the sheer number and variety of these devices. But actually, really 3 simple practices. Device cataloging, again, getting that asset list and that inventory, doing asset risk assessments within that catalog, network segmentation to make sure that you have proper segmentation of your IoT devices away from the user domain, and then consistent traffic analysis and anomaly detection. This touches into visibility. Now, remember that we have to have the visibility to be sure that these devices are acting normal. Now, we may find that to be a challenge with most systems, but actually IoT provides a very good scope of practicality here. And I'm using this slide as an example. If we take a typical end user system, we can see that the scope of behavior is fairly wide. Users, we have our browsers, we go out, I may go out to Smithsonian one day, I may go to IEEE the next day, I may do multiple things. I'm a human being, and I would say that I match most humans. So deny policies tend to be the way we would work in that scenario. But as you can see very quickly, as we start to move to a typical web server system, web or database, the policy scope becomes much narrower. Now it becomes capable to use a whitelist or an allow list. And if we move over to typical IoT systems, or even more so, typical industrial control systems, we see that their scope of behavior is incredibly narrow, which means that there are certain things that they do, and they do 24/7. They never change, and they never should modify the way they communicate or who or what they communicate with. This allows a very consistent policy base that can be done in very short allow lists. And this is something I'm going to talk about now. So if we're going to do this, we want to automate, because we have such a range that we're dealing with. We could be dealing with end users with PCs. We could be dealing with IoT devices that are fairly constrained. We could be dealing with servers that have some degree of constrainment. And we have to realize that individual segments will deliver this traffic segmentation. We refer to this as HyperSegmentation. And it allows for the critical or the isolation of critical applications. And basically, attackers really have actually, we haven't had anyone prove yet that it can be done to hack between these segments. And we've had several hackathons where the challenge has been to, for instance, go from the yellow to the purple or from the yellow to the green. And we have hackers that have attempted. We've had formal red teaming tests. And I'm very pleased to say that after dozens of hackathons, we have yet to have the fabric be compromised. Now, this is one degree of it, but if you're going to sit at a CLI console all day and set these segments up and basically attribute users and devices to these segments, well, that really doesn't take away the complexity. Really, the next step is to actually use extreme control in tandem with extreme policy. Now, once these policies are attributed to users or devices, the hypersegment relation can be very, very granular and somewhat automatic. So this basically gets to the notion of elasticity, where segments are extended upon policy, the policy is matched to the user, and then we have a policy that we can use as a scope for our monitoring and our visibility to make sure that that end device is behaving appropriately. And this is a very key thing. Gives you the continued vigilance. This gives you the ability to have the monitoring capability and the constriction of behavior that you need in order to establish zero trust environments. Now, once we have this automation in place, we want to separate our domains of interest, but we want to utilize common visibility and management practices for all segments. And Fabric Attach and Fabric Connect are ideal protocols to make this happen. Our networking fabric is very good at providing common domains of interest for visibility, and yet at the same time using network microsegmentation to separate user or device communities of interest. Another note here is I show IT, IoT, and ICS. Obviously, we're not going to take all of our IT systems and put them in one giant segment. We have engineering, we may have finances, we may have sales, we may have whatever, just using Extreme as an example. It's the same thing with IoT. It's the same thing with industrial control. Don't take all your IoT devices and just lump them into one segment and say, that's my IoT segment. Separate your video surveillance from your building control and your perimeter control. Separate your HVAC. Separate any sensors that you may have. Same thing on a production floor with industrial control. Separate your drive asset machinery from your controllers. These things are very, very critical. Microsegmentation of the domains will basically provide the ability to create gates. And these gates are very critical because the gates can be totally isolated domains of interest, or you can have very small domains of interest with security demarcation. And in order to move into that segment or out, you have to cross the security demarcation. And again, that utilizes devices like firewalls in combination with the fabric to provide this visibility and this vigilance. Don't forget the cloud. Remember, anytime you port cloud, you are putting assets up into them, whether it's a virtual machine, whether it's storage, whether it's data. Think about data compliance. Think about regulatory requirements. Think about business continuity and disaster recovery. Now, cloud can be a very handy thing in that. But remember, if you're using cloud backup for ransomware protection, make sure that those are totally offline. No continuous data protection or mirroring practices because they're going to be attached online to the system that's attacked. And it's just an extension of the target. You will be affected by ransomware in your cloud, and it's been known to happen. So when you do backups, make sure that you snap them, make sure they're totally offline, and have no connectivity to the system in question. That gives you an insurance policy, and it allows you to tell the ransomware folks that you're not going to pay the ransom. Now, will you lose some data? Of course. But the point is you have complete data integrity according to the timestamp of your last snap. Step 3, leverage industry resources. And I love to talk about this because many folks don't know about these resources. The Cloud Security Alliance, and Extreme Networks is a member. I highly recommend it. It's a great social community. You can get a lot of best practice papers from the CSA. I highly recommend it if you're thinking about going into the cloud or you're thinking about improving your security practice for your presence that's already into the cloud. The CSA is a very good resource. CI security controls. This is another one, critical infrastructure security controls. It's basically a series of groupings that allow you to establish best practices according to what they call control groups. And they have CI security for end systems and regular users, but they also have CI security practices for IoT as well. And I highly recommend this. And again, this is an open system consortium. You can contribute to it. You can actually join the community. I highly recommend this resource. And then finally, the MITRE Attack Defense Framework. The MITRE Attack Defense Framework is a very interesting framework, and many people are overwhelmed when they get to it because it's a very massive matrix of potential vulnerabilities, potential advanced persistent threat groups that utilize these exploits, and it basically can be rather daunting. However, there are some recommended papers that are on the site that show usage scenarios, and I'm going to touch a little bit on that as we move forward, because once you put a scope on what you're trying to identify, then the MITRE ATT&CK defense framework becomes very, very powerful because you can almost analyze what the potential attacker is going to do and the tools that they're going to use. Now, I want to emphasize that all of these resources are free. They're available to you. There are white papers, there are ebooks, there are practices, there are interactive displays, such as the matrix itself for MITRE ATT&CK. I highly recommend them, and I highly recommend you incorporate their use into your security practice. Finally, step 4, continued vigilance. Learn the things to look out for. Understand what your IoT devices should be doing, i.e. a video surveillance camera. It comes up, it will talk to a DVR, digital video recorder, most probably, maybe 2 for redundancy. And then, of course, it's going to talk to the video management server. Most security desks will not access the video surveillance cameras directly. They will do so through the video management server, which means that the camera should talk to 3 different systems and it should never talk to anything else. If the camera does start to exhibit behaviors where it wants to move east-west and it wants to, for instance, talk to other video surveillance cameras, that is an indication that something is drastically wrong. Don't wait when you see anomalies like that. Early detection can prevent propagation, and it's very, very key that you do things early. Don't wait and see something unusual and then leave it in your network for a period of time, because that could actually be the difference between an incident and a catastrophe. Now, I want to go over these 15 indicators of compromise because they are a very handy list to compare with MITRE ATT&CK. And this gives you the scope that I talked about earlier. Look for unusual outbound traffic patterns, anomalies in privileged account behaviors, geographical irregularities, someone logging in from New York and then literally 4 hours later they're logging in from Los Angeles. That should be investigated. Login red flags, unusual time location, failures, things of that nature, multiple failures, swells in database read volume, particularly raw access to databases. That really shouldn't ever really be happening. HTML response sizes. This is an indication of things that could be happening, such as SQL injection, things of that nature on your web services. And obviously, make sure your web services are particularly defined with data delimits so that things like SQL and script injection can't be happening on your exposed web services. Large numbers of requests for the same file, mismatched port application type, DNS request anomalies. I'm not going to go through all of these. They are available to you. And we do provide these in an ebook that we'll make available to you. You can get access to them at the Extreme Networks website. And this ebook kind of goes through these 15 indicators of compromise as well as the top 10 practices that we talked about. Now, on DNS, there are some particulars that I'd like to talk about here, is that we want to make sure that we're locking down our systems to prevent any changes to the DNS settings. And we also want to make sure that we're not allowing the use of third-party VPNs, particularly no split tunnel behaviors, because those tend to be very difficult, if not impossible, to monitor. Lock down your firewalls to allow DNS queries from local DNS systems only, and block outbound port 53 unless it comes from a trusted source like a DNS forwarder or something of that nature. Look for questionable patterns in your DNS logs. Separate traffic. Again, I come back to that. Separate traffic because it's going to make it easier for you to decipher your DNS logs and be able to separate your queries against those different segments. And then again, be aware of Tor activity, i.e. the dark web. Tor is basically the use of the third-party VPNs, basically TLS, to basically Tor hubs, and that allows anonymity and privacy, and while that may be desirable in certain instances, it is largely undesirable in most enterprises because Tor cannot be monitored. So someone could literally be exfiltrating out of your network and you would have no way to be able to determine that. Remember that zero trust it's not a technology. It is a journey. And John Kindervag, who is one of the founder concepts, basically says that trust is a vulnerability. And I think you should take this to heart. Remember that 30% of security breaches are actually happening inside the network. As a result of this, more enterprises are taking the concept of addressing and adopting some sort of zero trust practice. Now, remember, zero trust in a K through 12 or a university is going to be quite a bit different from zero trust in a state and local government or a federal agency. Okay, so we have to realize that there is a range here. But remember, the philosophy assumes that no users or devices or machines should be automatically trusted, and as a result, firewalls alone are not enough. We have to have a holistic practice that marries in the network, firewalls, intrusion detection. All of this needs to be married consistently. And again, we want to start from the vantage that no user or device is trusted. Educate your staff, make sure they're aware of the practice, strictly enforce those practices, and then maintain vigilance. Very, very key. Extreme networks, we deliver quite a bit in endpoint security, segmentation and isolation, cloud security, wireless intrusion protection and intrusion detection, IoT security, compliance, AI and ML assisted security for analytics and the vigilance that we're talking about. Remember, we've done numerous hackathons without a single breach, and this is a testament to our fabric and our segmentation and isolation capabilities. These technologies alone will not deliver zero trust. But if you use these appropriately with the practices that I've talked about, you can approach a zero trust practice. To wrap up, expect more of the same in 2021, except potentially on a larger scale. Remember, by the end of 2021, we're going to have 10 times more devices than users on the internet. IoT, cloud, AI, ML, they are the new attack vectors. Attackers are using IoT, they're using cloud as potential vectors of attack, and they're also starting to use AI and ML to enumerate your network and your topology. So they're growing more advanced just along with us. Any technology that can be used for good can also be used for bad. This is something that we need to remember in security practice. No company or vertical is immune to attacks. Therefore, getting the basics right, enforcing proper security practices, leveraging industry resources, and continued vigilance. Again, don't wait when you see anomalies. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you appreciate the advice that I've given, and I even more hope that you incorporate it into your security practice. Thank you very much.